Good morning. It's a joy to be with you all, and it's lovely to see your faces. I'm sorry that I'm a bit more crocked than I usually am, but see what the Lord will do for us this morning. Our first heading is the light of the world. Now, John's Gospel is a committed piece of writing. It was written by a man with a mission. He had a purpose in writing in the way that he did. He wanted the words that he wrote to have an impact on his readers. And that's why, although Jesus performed a great many miracles, John chose to highlight just 7 of the miracles that Jesus performed. And John chose the 7 that he highlighted with great care, both for what they would say about Jesus himself, and also because singly and together they would make an impression on anyone who would read about them. His reason for choosing these 7, and he called them signs, what was his special word for the miracles of Jesus, was unashamedly evangelistic. In chapter 20 and verse 31, John said this: "These are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name." Actually, if I expanded that slightly, John said this: "Many other signs did Jesus in the presence of his disciples." In other words, Jesus did a whole lot more miracles than the ones I've highlighted. But these are written that you might believe, and that believing you might have life through his name. Now, we've got before us this morning the 6th out of the 7 signs that Jesus told. A story of a remarkable miracle of healing. Jesus gave sight to a man who had been blind from the very moment of his birth. Until that time, he'd not seen anything at all. Not one thing. Not seen his mother. He'd been a blind baby. He'd been a blind toddler, completely sightless through the whole of his boyhood, his youth, and his early manhood. But while the cure itself was very striking, it's not the main point of the story. It's not the main point of the story at all. The important thing about a signpost, well, think about it. What is the main point of a signpost? When Barbara and I are finished with our day, we'll make our way home back to Lancaster, and we'll observe a great many signs with Lancaster written on them. Now, the point of those signposts is not the signposts themselves. It's the fact that they're pointing to Lancaster, that ancient city. And Lancaster itself is the point of the signposts. Now, a wonderful healing means quite simply that a healer is on the loose. Yeah? Now, this incident is important for what it tells us about Jesus himself. It all began when the disciples posed a question. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? They understood that there was a connection between illness and sin in general. Good theology. The Old Testament scriptures also included some examples of illness that were clearly inflicted as specific judgments of God for specific acts of sin. Was this such a case? And some first century rabbis had even speculated, for example, that if a pregnant woman were to go into a pagan temple, the uterus within her would contract the sin of idolatry. Feasible, perhaps? You could imagine people thinking that if a mother carrying a child were to go into a temple of one of the surrounding pagan nations around Israel and wander into that temple, would the child that she was carrying inside her contract the guilt of idolatry from the mother? Who knows? And it's a similar speculation to that Jesus' disciples were asking. Well, Jesus' response, no, a definite no. And the man was not blind as a judgment upon some sin of his own, or indeed some sin of his parents. His condition was an opportunity to demonstrate the power of God in the face of human need. Wonderful. And no problem that afflicts mankind is so devastating that Jesus can't remove it at a stroke. And Jesus here was driven by a sense of compulsion. And just as there are only so many hours of daylight before night falls, Jesus was intensely aware of the passage of time. He was heading for an appointment with his destiny. Little time remained to do his Father's work in this world. Verse 4. So at this point, Jesus uttered one of the most remarkable short sentences ever spoken by human lips. There in verse 5, I am the light of the world. And in saying this, Jesus repeated something that he'd said earlier in chapter 8. I'm the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. And that is breathtaking. It's a staggering claim. The Son of God here said nothing less than that everyone who's not one of his followers walks in darkness. Think of it. Darkness is a striking metaphor for the human condition. What we are like by nature as human beings. All the people in Ulverston and in Swarthmore and in Barrow and the neighbouring communities who think that what Sunday is for is to fill your day with shopping. It's not really a flattering description of the bulk of humanity. Jesus meant that unless we follow him, our moral and spiritual world is pitch black. It says something about the way we are as human beings, intellectually, what our minds are like. And Jesus is saying that our ability to think straight is compromised. We have no fixed points, no landmarks. We're left groping in complete ignorance of the way ahead. We don't know which way to go. It says something about the way we are morally. Our natural ability to do the right thing is as elusive as trying to catch a butterfly. By saying, "I'm the light of the world," Jesus claimed to be the only person who can show us the way out of the fog of intellectual and moral confusion, which is self-inflicted. In all normal circumstances, a man who said what Jesus said, "I'm the light of the world, I'm the only person who can show you the way out of the dark," well, a man who said what Jesus said would be either a monstrous liar with a bloated ego or a candidate for the asylum. And candidly, most people think that that's what he's like. They wouldn't actually put it like that, but that's what they quietly think. But by healing a blind man and dispelling physical darkness from that man's life for good, the Son of God left hanging in the air the disturbing possibility that his claim to deal with another kind of darkness, a much worse kind of darkness, could well be right, you know. Some commentators see tremendous significance in the clay and the spittle that Jesus put on the man's eyes, there in verse 6. You see, God made the first person out of dust. And now here was Jesus, busy with God's new creation. And others make much of the fact that the word Siloam, in verse 7, the name of the pool where the man bathed, well, it means sent. Jesus was sent by God. But perhaps the most striking phrase in the whole narrative, late in verse 7, is that the man came back seeing. He was able to see immediately. It's strange to consider that ordinarily, if people go to have surgery on their eyes in an eye hospital, they're not cured instantly. It's some time before they have the bandages removed. And the doctors are very concerned that they should have their eyes opened gradually so that the daylight doesn't come upon them instantly and isn't painful for them. But this man came back seeing. He could see everything instantly. and he'd been blind as a baby, and blind as a small child and toddler, and blind all the way through his youth and manhood. And now he could see everything instantly. How remarkable. And his neighbours and friends could hardly believe it was the same man. But this is Jesus. No handicap is beyond help when he intervenes. He's never defeated. No problem that afflicts the human race is so dreadful that it says to Jesus, "Not even you can defeat me." And Jesus gave this man more than the gift of physical sight. As the story moves on, we learn that the religious leaders turned on this man and expelled him from his local synagogue. And at this point, Jesus came looking for him. Verse 35. Jesus had no intention of abandoning this poor man. He'd already introduced this man to a world that he'd never known before. Think of it, a world where the sun shone. A world where flowers bloomed. A world where people had faces. Not just voices. Isn't that great? All of a sudden, this man knew that people had faces. He knew what a pretty girl was. Never conceived of that reality before. A world of colour. All the colours of God's rainbow. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. All of that, when people had tried to explain to this man what red was. He'd gained a wonderful new perception of all the glories of creation. But now, Jesus introduced him to something more wonderful by far, the Creator himself. The exchange of words in verses 35 onwards, Jesus heard that they'd cast him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" The man answered, "Who is he, Lord, that I might believe in him?" And Jesus said, "You've both seen him, and it's I who is talking to you." And then he said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshipped him. Now think especially of the phrase, "You have seen him." The best thing he saw on that day of wonders, and he'd seen so much in the last few hours, well, the best thing he saw was Jesus' face. And in response, he worshipped him. He prostrated himself in homage, and Jesus can open the eyes of anyone. Oh, what a wonder if he opened the eyes of all the children here. It is a joy and a wonder to me. How many years have I been coming to this building and to the various places where we've worshipped before, the choral. I delight to come here, It's a joy to me. And now to see the place full of children. And if I were to learn before I die that some of the children who come here had had their eyes opened by Jesus, that would fill me with joy, friends. Well, I know that everyone here can see in the everyday sense of the world. One of the amazing things about Ulverston is that on a good day you can see Ingleborough, just as you can from parts of Lancaster. If you go to the highest part of the city, you can look out and you can see that fine mountain looking down over our city. But can you see the big questions? What's the meaning of life? What happens when we die? Coming to Jesus is like getting a filing system inside your head. It's as though someone has turned the light on. And for the first time, you find that you can think straight. Wow, come to the light. Come to the light. Now, next heading, shutting out the light. You see, in this narrative, there were some people who did. Jesus has a way of dividing people. When people are confronted with Jesus Christ and with the claims that he makes on us human beings, there are some people who react to him with enthusiasm, while other people dig their heels in. Yeah, bother. Excuse me. 2 pages stuck together. That's it. Got it. Some people simply refuse to give me hearing. Even as I speak this morning, some of you will find the truth about Jesus heartwarming. It's always possible, on the other hand, that some might find it difficult. In the story before us, the reaction of the Pharisees to Jesus is disturbing. It's clear that they were not sure how to react to the miracle of the man who was born blind. Some of them simply discounted it straight away because it was done on the Sabbath, as you know. Surely this can't be right. You can see them thinking to themselves. In their view, Jesus had broken one of the 10 commandments. That's not right. And that being so, he was a sinner. And if a miracle really had taken place, there must be some other explanation. It could not have been done by the power of God. And we know that sometimes miracles come from another source. Not all supernatural power is from God. Pharaoh's magicians, read in the book of Exodus, they performed signs and wonders of a certain kind. And Others started with the miracle itself. Verse 16, now surely a man who was in league with the devil would not be able to do such things. Jesus' opponents here could not agree among themselves about this miracle. They tried to solve their dilemma and achieve a measure of unanimity just by bullying the poor man who'd been born blind. They tried to push him into a corner. Perhaps he'd reveal something that would help them arrive at a common mind. Perhaps he'd not actually been born blind after all. Verse 18, they certainly hoped that he hadn't and began to intimidate the man's parents. Verse 19. They tried that in the hope that they would let slip either that he'd never been blind in the first place, or that it was not Jesus who'd actually cured him. Well, the parents don't come out of this story very well. They were frightened by the attitude of the Pharisees, frightened of getting into trouble themselves, so they passed the buck to their son. Well, he's grown up, let him speak for himself. So, look again at the Pharisees. Tell the truth before God. Admit that this man is a sinner. Now, at this point, there's something very attractive about the man who'd been born blind. Whether he was a sinner or not, I've no idea. But there's one thing I do know. I was blind once, and now I'm not. How do you account for that? You see how frank this chap is. I mean, he's not a trained theologian like these guys were supposed to be. You know, how do you account for that? Now, I used to be completely blind, and now I can see. How do you account for a guy who could do that to me? What sort of reasoning explained this? If they could convince themselves that there was no miracle, then there was no miracle worker. But once they accepted that a genuine cure had taken place, they would have to admit that Jesus really was who he claimed to be. Now, this was what was behind the closing words of Jesus here, where he said, "For judgment I've come into this world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may be made blind." Then some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words and said, "Are we blind also?" Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you say, 'We see,' therefore your sin remains." Some people will always be blind to Jesus. All those people in the world at large who trot out all sorts of false explanations for Jesus. A great teacher. Oh dear. Now, a lot of the people that we know, that we have in our friendship group, who may well unlike me, who need glasses, have 20/20 vision still, but who spend their life so far deliberately closing their mind to what is patently true, according to Holy Scripture, when it comes to spiritual things, well, moles and bats can see better than they can, as far as the truth of Jesus Christ is concerned. You know, for blind people, things like boiling a kettle or opening a tin of beans can lead to grisly accidents. But spiritual blindness is worse because it's deliberate. And in effect, people in that state are crawling on all fours, unable to see a thing near the edge of a cliff. Opening up to the light. That's our final heading. The man that Jesus met is an attractive and likable figure. He had no education. He'd earned his living as a beggar. Right up to that very day, he couldn't read a word. Completely unprepared for an encounter with a group of trained theologians. That's very humbling, isn't it? And yet his sturdy independence of spirit was remarkable. The Pharisees' treatment of him had nearly the opposite effect to what they had hoped. They intended to hector and bully him. An ordinary man up against the experts. So their hope was that he'd eventually give way and accept that he must have been mistaken when Jesus met him and cured him. But apparently his appreciation of Jesus grew little by little, stage by stage. His eyes were opened wider. Note how he responded to their first challenge. What do you say about him because he opened your eyes? He said, he's a prophet. Verse 17. Now at this stage, the man who had been blind could not pay Jesus a higher compliment. He's a prophet. He'd not actually seen Jesus yet at this stage, but knew from what he'd learned of the Old Testament scriptures that prophets were men that God had sent. And that some of the prophets even had the ability to work miracles. You think of Elijah and Elisha. Now in verses 24 and 5, we see this man revolted by the stubbornness of the Pharisees, and not only that, their lack of common sense. He still had much to learn. You know, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. But all the threats and all the bluster of the Pharisees couldn't shake him out of his glorious certainty. One thing I don't know, but once I was blind and now I can see. Oh, I mean, being able to see is brilliant when there was a time when I couldn't. Just think about that. Think of everything that we people who can see take for granted. I love being able to see my wife's face every day of the week. I really do. I like seeing all your faces when I come here to preach. I really do. I hope you understand this word, but you won't look downright canny. I love to see the children. I could give them all a cuddle, you know, I really could. Seeing is just great. I remember we had a chap in the church in Lancaster who couldn't. And the poignant thing about it was that he had been, before he went blind, a painter and decorator. And he was a good one. Now, think what a solemn pity of a thing it is for a chap who'd been a painter and decorator to lose his ability to earn his living in that way. And then he went blind. What a strange thing for God to do to one of his servants, to take away his sight when he used to earn his living painting people's homes. But this is the amazing thing. His name was Barry, by the way. And then he started to be able to give Christian talks through the hospital service to the patients based on the scriptures. It was so remarkable. He did this through the Gideons, you know. And the Gideons now have another name, and I've forgotten it for the moment. Something like Good News for Everybody. And he used to go into the local schools. And he had a guide dog. Guide dog was called Buster. And Buster used to lead him onto the platform in the school halls where they had their assemblies. And he spoke to school assemblies in Lancaster and Morecambe. And it was a wonder to see how he didn't have any fear of standing up in the school assembly, standing, you know, at the edge, where you would think a blind person would be worried about falling off. I'm worried about falling everywhere these days. And there was Barry, blind as a bat, blind as a mole, talking about the glory of the gospel. Great to be able to see things. Great to be able to see things that other people can't see. Great to be able to see how wonderful Jesus is when other people are completely blind to it. There's a face that I haven't seen since 1971. My father. I have every anticipation about seeing that again. Well, and then this lovely moment where this delightful man here in the narrative teases the Pharisees. Do you also want to become his disciples? Verse 27. You see, if the Pharisees had been men of integrity, they'd have realised that he pricked the bubble of their arrogance. And he goes on to say, this is a marvellous thing that you don't know where he is from. Yet he's opened my eyes. Now we know that God doesn't hear sinners. But if anyone's a worshipper of God and does his will, God hears him. Since the world began, it's been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. If this man were not from God, he couldn't do something like that. And when he met Jesus again, it all fell into place. This trap opened like a flower in the sunshine. He didn't need much convincing that Jesus was who he claimed to be. Oh, friends, isn't this great, this story? I want to leave you at that point because it's time to close there, but it's just such a lovely story, and I've got one that's even better this evening, so try and get along if you can. Been a treat to be with you. Spiritual perception, that's what it's all been about this morning, and our closing praise.